Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on how to fast forward ITSM to support the digital enterprise. I'm Matt Clausen, VP of Product Marketing for Cherwell Software, and with me today we are very fortunate to have Julie Moore, who is a recognized author and speaker, and Chris Chagnon, who is the ITSM application and web developer for WPI, and also a speaker for HDI and other professional organizations as well around this topic. So I was fortunate enough to have spoken with both of them at some roadshow events that Cherwell has put on in the last few weeks, and we still have a couple more. And so this is going to be a really, really interesting conversation with them. We've had some interesting dialogue and questions from the audience and some of the roadshow, and we'll kind of draw on some of that material as well here. But just so you know, if you do have a question, you can enter your question at any time in the Q&A area. And in addition, and then we'll be handling those questions at the end, and so there will be time. So you can enter your question at any time, right? And then I'll remind you when we get close to the end as well. To go ahead and enter your questions in the Q&A area, and we will handle those questions. So with that, let's go ahead and do quick introductions. So Julie, could you give a quick introduction of yourself? That'd be awesome.
Sure. I've been in the service and support industry for many years, a couple decades now. Mainly, kind of my experience is in the operational design and transition stages of the life cycle. Worked as a practitioner for many years, then as a consultant, and now as what I like to call a single shingle, just me out there on my own, changing conversations.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Julie. How about Chris? Can you give us a quick intro as well?
Absolutely. So I am Chris Chagnon, and I work at Worcester Polytechnic Institute as an ITSM application and web developer. I've been in the service and support industry for just over 10 years, working through most of the different positions in the user support area. But now I actually focus on innovating how we use IT service management tools and where we're going next for all of that. As part of that, I am also a Ph.D. student studying user experience and information systems. So that's been really vital towards helping to figure out exactly how we can change or model the future of IT service management.
All right, thanks, Chris. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our discussion. So I'm hitting this forward. Here we go. All right, so the first question, I'm going to do a quick intro on a lot of these questions, just to kind of define some of the terms, make sure we're all on the same page. So this first question deals with digital transformation. So first of all, I think it'd be good just to define digital transformation, talk a little bit about what it means, and then we'll get into the discussion. So a couple interesting things about digital transformation. First of all, as I have done several roadshow events, I did a poll in those roadshow events as to which organizations represented there have digital transformation initiatives in 2018, either underway or starting. And it's been unanimous thus far. So 100% of the people have said yes, the organization. So it means it's ubiquitous, right? Digital transformation. And in fact, IDC suggests that $1.3 trillion is budgeted for digital transformation in 2018 alone. But there are some interesting concepts and terms that I think we should just talk about briefly. So first of all, there's this concept of digitization. So digitization is, taking maybe a paper-based process or a manual process and making it digital, making it more efficient, potentially automating workflows, and using tools, software-based tools, maybe services online, cloud-based services, et cetera, to make that more efficient, more user-friendly, which brings me to another term, which is user experience, or experience is a big topic. So this is in fact in Forrester's recent study. Today, in 2018, that is the #1 sort of initiative around digital transformation, which is around user experience or customer experience. Another term is agility. So again, a lot of organizations view digital transformation as the ability for their organization to take advantage of a market opportunity rapidly, right? The company who can get to that market opportunity first, has systems in place, et cetera, automation in place, digital connections and integrations can take advantage of those market opportunities. And then the last term that I skipped over is disruption. I think this is a really interesting term because this is where sort of rubber meets road, I think, in digital transformation, is when you can disrupt a segment of an industry. And so I think this is a great point at which to hand this over to Julie, because she talked about disruption a lot in her roadshow presentation. So Julie, can you talk a little bit about what digital transformation means to you and how disruption plays a role?
Certainly. Digital transformation is really about disrupting our current way of thinking about how we deliver services and drive innovation at the same time that we're leveraging the technologies in new and exciting ways that help to transform the business. And we have to consider how the organization works today, its activities, its processes, its models, and its tools, and look for opportunities to create that change through innovation and leveraging, the vast amount of digital technologies that are available. And our goal is to create profound change, right? Something that positively impacts the business, our customers, and in some cases, with some organizations, even with society. So digital transformation can be significant, where we're developing innovative strategies that disrupt long-standing practices that have been in the industry for decades, or it can be very small mini disruptions that drive change incrementally. Consider, for example, like our traditional development model for an application, right? We start with the business need, and then through this iterative development process, we deliver functionality to the business. Digital transformation looks at this in a completely different way. We combine the development with maybe a new support model that's built directly into the app using artificial intelligence, and we'll deliver that experience via, a mobile platform. So really disrupting the way that we view the development cycle and what we produce as far as value to the business. So the key here for digital transformation is really looking at driving organizational change and disrupting our current ways of thinking and letting go of established norms or ideas about how IT has traditionally done business.
Awesome. Thank you. So Chris, maybe you can provide, some examples of initiatives that either WPI has going on around digital transformation or maybe other ones that you know about in the industry.
Absolutely. So at WPI, we're actually in the middle of our Enterprise Transformation Project, which is a well-supported top-down project at the university to transform a lot of processes that need to be digitized. Some huge aspects of that are we're implementing a new ERP system. So we're digitizing a lot of processes with that were manual or done through spreadsheets, which is going to be very helpful for that. Another aspect of that is in a university, we have a project-based curriculum where students are doing lots of different project work and they're submitting that. So they're actually starting a new e-project system. So it's really interesting to see how those types of things at the higher ed aspect really do impact that transformation. So transformation, one of the most common things that we do see is trying to digitize those paper processes. It has one of those biggest bang for your buck type deliveries that ends up coming out of that, because we end up seeing a lot of things that end up streamlining those workflows in digitizing those.
Okay, so let's just transition. I think that's a great transition to the next question that I'll just queue up for you, Chris, which is, what role does IT and IT ops play in those initiatives? And so, we see this all the time at Sharewell as we're working with our customers, that the role of IT is being elevated in the business again. We see this, time and time again, where, it's kind of interesting how there's sort of been peaks and valleys in terms of the role of IT. If you think back to, let's say, the mid-90s, right, most everything had to come through IT. So if you wanted to implement anything, the CIO was involved, right? But then IT started being outsourced, and then there was, sort of rise of shadow IT, and SaaS has become mainstream. And so there's a lot of other options for the business than always going to IT. But I do think that some of these key initiatives they're coming back to IT to sort of enable them. But can you talk a little bit about your perspective on the role of IT and IT ops, Chris?
As we start adding a lot more digital processes, the role of IT does become increasingly important. IT will need to either manage those SaaS relationships or the infrastructure to host some of these things. But it's also not just about the software or the applications that are running. IT has actually taken an increasingly more important role as a data broker or a data manager. IT needs to figure out how all of these different systems that are being implemented integrate with each other. IT needs to be more than just a break-fix place or a place that these different business units can go to when they purchase a new product. IT needs to figure out how it can help to make sure all of these different SaaS titles, all these cloud infrastructure items that are being purchased work with each other harmoniously. You can imagine a situation where we've had 20 different SaaS products purchased and none of them talk to each other. You could end up having to re-implement the same exact type of thing over and over again. So IT becoming an integrator is a key aspect of what's going on right now with IT operations.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think one of the things that I've heard a lot about is how digital transformation, digital transformation is really about kind of a cross-functional set of processes. But so Julie, what is your perspective? Can you add something to this?
Yeah, I'm from my perspective, I see operations as being directly impacted by any of these disruption transformations, because what we're seeking to do really is to reduce cost, improve agility, and better serve the customers. I mean, that's really the promise of going through, the transformation. So this often means what the areas that we're analyzing through digital transformation are reducing the friction for the customer's experience. And one of the biggest frictions for our customers is when they try to get a hold of support staff when things aren't working. And it can be difficult to get a hold of somebody, either long wait times, or when they do get a hold of somebody, they're getting resources that don't necessarily have the answers, and it's faster for them to look things up on Google. So as the customers become smarter and the technologies begin to digitize these, transactional processes that, are low value adds to the customer, but very iterative, high iterative processes, our operational teams now have to have more in-depth abilities, a stronger focus on serving the business as automation takes over those repetitive tasks. So we're going to need more stronger collaborative models to get the best minds to work together to solve stuff like Chris was talking about, right? These complex things about how to get systems to talk together. When you start talking about problem management across those systems as well, it can be incredibly difficult to figure out what's going on. So we need stronger skill sets and more collaborative models to support the digital transformation.
So it's interesting, you mentioned a couple of these references are directly to what I would say is maybe the area of IT service management. And you mentioned, sort of collaboration, reducing friction. But, Julie, in your perspective, what are some other thoughts you have around how IT service management sort of needs to evolve to further meet the needs of the digital business?
Yeah, I'm going to go back a little bit further in time than you did on the previous question. And, it used to be that IT was pretty much unmanaged but incredibly well-funded. And the pace of change was like lightning. And then after the dot-com burst, organizations reduced the funding and found that we had this monstrosity of complexity, and there was a difficult in managing the infrastructure. So in came service management as a way for us to create structure and discipline. IT service management has always been viewed as, essentially kind of saving us from ourselves. In hopes of us, focusing more of what we do on serving the business. And unfortunately, in many cases, I can't say all, but that rigor then slowed down or got in the way of our ability to change. But the pace of change with technology has not. So it continues to evolve, and our desires, especially from a customer perspective, to have the newest, greatest, shiniest gadget, that's constant. So now service management is impeding the organization's ability to keep up with that pace of change. So now we face this dilemma. How do we continually, rapidly change and not be seen as optional in the eyes of our customers. So if we can't change, they will find a provider that can. So service management organizations now need a model that provides agility with discipline integrated into the business, not done in parallel or alongside the business. So I think that's the biggest need for change, is to have service management that's agile, that's integrated into the business, not something that's done separate from it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Chris, maybe what's going on within your organization at WPI in terms of how are you changing the way service management works, or how have you evolved it? Maybe you're already well prepared and you've evolved it over the last few years.
So there's three main areas of service management that are evolving to meet this digital transformation. One big area is a mature change management process. With so many things in play, it's really important to capture exactly what's changing and when to reduce the impact. As part of reducing that impact, it's also really important to have asset and configuration item tracking. With those in place, you can figure out dependencies and what will impact what. So if you have a cloud authentication service that's running and you have to take that down, you need to know exactly which other services are impacted by that. It's not necessarily something as big as authentication, but because you have these upstream and downstream things that start happening, it's very important to know exactly where those dependencies are. And the final aspect that's really important is that training and knowledge management. With so many systems in play, it's really important to figure out exactly what your service desk or help desk is doing and where they need to escalate to vendors. Also, what support is in play. A lot of these different products that we're purchasing actually do have their own support documentation or support contacts, and it's figuring out exactly what those negotiations or SLAs are there. So what we're seeing a lot of is figuring out how do we integrate that support into our support to make something that the end users can end up really identifying with.
All right. I think that's really very practical advice, and seems very appropriate in this landscape. Tons of change going on, high complexity in terms of if you think of the topology or your asset map, if you will, and how everything is interconnected, and you have cloud, and you have on-prem, and hybrids, et cetera. It makes a lot of sense. So let's transition to the next question, which is, what types of automation are you employing, and sort of what do you have planned? So automation, there's a lot you could define automation again pretty broadly. One of the interesting things I've found is that when you talk about automation, AI tends to come up fairly frequently, and there's actually a lot of interesting studies around AI and how quickly organizations will be prepared to adopt AI and actually gain value, as well as the flip side of when will AI be ready to really make a difference. But there's a lot of other low-hanging fruit, right? You don't have to jump right to AI when you think about automation. And so, again, for Chris, as you are looking at how WPI is, transitioning in this digital world we live in, what are you guys doing around automation?
Sure. So for automation, one of the biggest things that we're doing is trying to, in digitizing those processes that we talked about a little bit earlier, automation for us is really about taking workflows that right now are manual or dependency-driven, waiting on one person to manually do something, and figuring out exactly what we need to do to get those done without having human intervention. So one of the biggest ones for us is finding out the different workflows for submitting requests or submitting even tickets for incidents or things that are broken. We have different mailboxes and mail monitors in place that help us kind of figure out exactly where those things should go. By having better self-service and request handling, we're actually automating a lot of that on the front end so that we don't have to have a higher tier person filling out or fulfilling tickets. We can actually figure out exactly where something needs to go or when there is intervention involved. On the research aspect of things in my Ph.D., we are doing a lot more advanced things, trying to use natural language processing and different algorithms and models to try and classify and automate the processing of incoming support requests. That type of stuff does seem very out there, but it's actually very approachable. There's a lot of different libraries or cloud services out there that can make almost any company that has a desire to start using these sorts of automations a lot easier access for.
All right. How about Julie? What do you think about, specifically maybe about comment on AI, and what's the future of AI? How do you see AI being applicable in this area?
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry. Artificial intelligence, it clearly holds a lot of promise on the innovation front, and it's a really exciting landscape. Some of those technologies that Chris was talking about, these are there for, to help us capitalize on using artificial intelligence within the service management organization. And there's one area in particular that has a lot of press and interest from, many of the major news sites, and that's the use of chatbots or bots to have conversation-like interactions with our customers 24/7. But underneath all the hoopla and the shiny mirrors, there's still a need for knowledge that can be used to program those systems to function like a conversation. So think of all the ways in which you could say hello, for example. Think about programming a bot that can respond in an intelligent way. We can program it to say hello based upon entering into the system all the possible ways in which you could say hello and then having responses to each of them. Or we can program the bot like Chris was talking about, where it's actually using natural language processing to try to figure out what's being said by looking at each word and then, trying to interpret what's being said. So currently, the side of using rules or programming these responses into the systems is probably the easiest way to begin using our knowledge to serve our customers through using automation such as bots. On the natural language processing side, however, that is still evolving, and although it's evolving much faster over the last 5 years than it has for the past couple decades, the early adopters have actually been seeing some positive results, but the landscape is it's all over the place. There's so many new vendors coming out. I think as organizations begin thinking about using artificial intelligence with, automation, that their plans should be, no more than 1 or 2 years. You don't want to be planning further out or making major investments. Like Chris said, some of these systems are easily and readily available to you, but, in 6 months it may be bought out by somebody else, or there's another tool that does more or has more functionality. So, it's great to be an early adopter, and I think it's an interesting field right now to pay attention to, and definitely an area that can help us to disrupt our current models. But I think it requires, more agility in our decision-making, meaning don't establish long-term strategies, but strategies that can adapt as this field plays its way out and the technologies continue to evolve.
Yeah, it's an extremely interesting area, and I think it will be really interesting to see how it plays out. But as you said, there's a lot of companies that are actually starting to gain value today. But I think the biggest thing that I've found is I've talked to individual customers and I've talked to analysts in this area, and that is there's nothing like laying the groundwork for automation and AI. And so part of that groundwork is about process, right? So I think in the roadshow I used a slide that had a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but the quote is it's from Bill Gates, and it's something like, automation employed to a dysfunctional process effectively, right? Simply makes just propagates that dysfunction. It doesn't actually necessarily help an organization significantly. Where you get value is when you employ automation to a process that is efficient and effective. And so one of the things we've seen is a huge transition in the world of IT in general, especially in the world of app dev and into DevOps, of Agile and Lean. But these concepts, right, are coming, they have to be embraced in some way, shape, or form by the IT service management world as well, and the service desk. And in fact, if you look at, it's really interesting, because if you actually look at ITIL, 2011, it's interesting because these concepts are not even really mentioned. So if you think about, release and deployment management, that particular process area within ITIL, it's a bit dated, right, the actual ITIL specification, because it doesn't actually talk about some of these modern concepts. And so I think there's some changes coming to ITIL in this area. There are other publications like Verism, VERISM, that I would encourage the audience to sort of take a look at, because it sort of starts talking about how do you employ some of these concepts in service management in a digital world. And so, Agile, when I think about Agile, I think about iterative, incremental collaboration, focused on value, focused on end customer value. And those are concepts that you can, of course, employ in service management and should be employing. You can use it as you're deploying new services to your portal, to your catalog. Lean, when I think about Lean, I think about a value stream. I think about driving out waste in a process. If you're thinking about automation, if you're thinking about a lot of the thinking around how do you automate, how do you employ AI even, in many instances, you have to sort of apply a Lean framework and Lean thinking. And then DevOps, of course, is, as you think about, again, release and deployment, it's completely changed the way in which that happens, and most organizations have been forced into at least thinking it in that concept. And in fact, I presented recently in a presentation with George Spalding from Pink Elephant, and he simply said, if you're not doing DevOps, you will or you have to, because it's just the way that it's going to become standardized. So with that kind of background, Julie, can you talk a little bit about how Agile, Lean, and DevOps is influencing IT Ops and Service Desk?
Yeah, when I look at Agile, Lean, and DevOps, to me they're all ways to solve the problem of agility, whether it's Agile development practices, eliminating the waste in the processes or service delivery, or connecting the development teams and the operational teams in an effort to make sure that what's developed can actually be delivered. So the result is really helping service management, the organization, to improve both speed and quality of value delivery. Lean, Agile, DevOps, they can all help to accelerate that value creation. But the biggest change to me, I think, is that these methods, they break down those barriers, our functional silos that manage the way that we work toward, advancing our technologies and developing our technical knowledge, to more focused on cross-functional work processes and methods that help us to leverage our knowledge and experience in focusing on delivering the value services for the business. So when I work with an organization that focuses on these practices, it's easier to create change when everyone is on the same page as to what's the outcome that we want to create, focusing on the business needs and looking at the complete customer experience. I think it also helps that it creates kind of a voice for IT operations. We're now a valued part of the bigger picture than we have ever had in the past. Rather than just viewing operations as a requirement, it's more viewed as something that provides a great value, not just to the business, but also to the IT organization.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Julie. Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
Julie really did hit it on the head there. I think the biggest change we're seeing is because of Agile, Lean, DevOps, it's the expectation. We no longer have a tolerance within our companies for something like a 2-year waterfall plan. While there's a lot of drive where people want to plan things out because of budget cycles or calendar years, things like that, people want to see quicker iterations and rapid cycles on that. They want quicker gratification and feedback loops. If we were to go back to a team and say that it'll be a year before we give them a product, I don't know that that team in any department would find that acceptable anymore. So that's kind of that biggest impact there.
Okay, yeah, thank you. All right, excellent. So now let's talk a little bit about IT, service management, or the concept of service management as it applies potentially beyond IT. So again, this is the one in the road show. I talked a little bit about this in our presentation, but in essence, this is this whole notion. Again, I mentioned it earlier, which is true digital transformation. Many happens cross-functionally, and so one of the examples that a lot of people find easy to sort of understand is if you think about onboarding an employee, right? So if the goal of onboarding an employee is employee should be productive day one, but if you go even further than that and say, okay, moment one, employee is productive, but in that process of onboarding them, everything that happens up to that point, how much can be automated in that process versus making the manager fill out forms, making others in the organization that are busy, spend a bunch of their time. So how much of that can be actually automated? But then you start thinking about it, well, it's not just HR, right? HR may initiate the process of onboarding an employee, but to make an employee productive, he has to have probably a laptop, maybe a phone. A mobile phone device might be issued by IT. It's going to have access to systems. There's facilities. He's going to have a desk, or she's going to have a desk, chair, etc. Office potentially space. What about security, access to the building, etc.? So there's a lot of other areas that are all impacted, and so we're seeing a trend from our customers that they're starting to look at how do we integrate. And again, role of IT saying, some of these things look a lot like if you apply ITIL or apply service management concepts, in automating these processes, putting in checks and balances, approvals, etc. These could be used in other areas. So with that in mind, Chris, why don't you talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that are going on at WPI, maybe how you've moved beyond IT in some areas.
Service management right now at WPI, we've extended to the areas that kind of made the most sense first. One of the first partners that we integrated into our system was our marketing department. The marketing department manages the content management system and the marketing-facing website for the university. So they had their own CMS help desk that was answering very similar calls. Beyond having a very similar nature to service management that we do in IT, it's one of those places where you say, where are the users going to go? Do you think that your users are going to know that there is a marketing help desk and an IT help desk, and then the website is different, and depending on which website, what we were finding is we needed a way to integrate those two systems together because we had no way of really crossing between the two. So that was one of our first quick wins, and we started saying, what other wins are like that? We have talked with people in our library. We've started adding business analysts who are embedded in the department. We have certain academic departments where there are people who are computer maintenance or lab managers, and it made sense to have them in there. So IT might provide the equipment, but they were really managing the equipment. So we started adding all of those different partners in there. As far as enterprise, we do have goals to start expanding beyond just IT. There's things like card access, because that's a technology, but it's not managed by IT. We don't really have our facilities group or our human resources group in there. They've had their own solutions, so now what we're trying to do is figure out those integrations. And that's kind of the power of what we've been able to do, is say, how do we integrate with you rather than forcing you onto our platform? Well, our platform could handle a lot of that. It's really about figuring out how to work with them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's an absolute key to what you discussed, which is, there's this balance between, collapsing automation and workflow onto that same platform, right, where you're actually taking on the entire function, versus and adding it to your portal and maybe your service catalog, right, versus integrating with an existing system that another department already has, that still, still potentially significantly helps with the automation of those processes, right, and the flow of information and data across those systems. So, I don't know, Julie, what other examples do you have? Do you have any other interesting examples to draw from?
You know, I think it's really what we're talking about is the transactional work that's being done in business processes. You know, that's the easiest place for IT to go and capture these opportunities to better serve the business. And this is because we have the systems and we have the knowledge in place for how to handle transactional type work. So business units like HR, payroll, finance that have very iterative processes that are well documented and well known, these are the easiest place for us to put automation and improve the outcome and reduce cost, right? The bottom line is we're trying to improve service, but by saving money. And so, you know, most IT organizations, you know, some of them are not handling their transactional work well today. So it's going to be hard to bridge that gap into helping the business to manage their transactional processes. And I say that because if I look at the success that can be driven through, you know, the examples that Matt, you, and Chris gave, you know, it's really about having a good understanding, you know, a good solid knowledge base of what is the process, what is the outcome, what are the tools, and understanding how the cross-functional work is done today, so that when you go after automation and, you know, digitizing those processes, you get that successful outcome. So when I work with customers, it's always about streamlining what they have today, cleaning it up first before you go after, you know, automating and bringing tools in for that. So if you're looking at how can we leverage that within the business, it makes sense that the first logical step that we're going to take is to look at what transactional work do we have within the business that can be automated successfully using the tools that we're using in IT to automate our own iterative processes.
Yeah. I completely agree. So, I mean, there's a couple more examples maybe I'll just throw out there that are, I think, are really interesting. So first of all, I guess there's a backdrop, right? This whole area of IT service management sort of expanding to other enterprise functions has been, you know, there's a term that's sort of been coined, which is called ITSM, or Enterprise Service Management. And not everybody agrees with that term, so it's not necessarily completely industry standard. But if anybody in the audience is interested in that area, Forrester, for instance, is about to publish, I think, some research in that area. And what's interesting, I think, is how they define enterprise service management. And so they basically, there's sort of three core concepts to enterprise service management. Number one is having a platform that supports traditional IT service management flows, right, and processes. Number two is the ability to rapidly sort of customize or tailor automation workflows, add new ones to that platform. And then third is the ability to deploy ready-made solutions, right, fit-for-purpose solutions in other areas. So the ones that are most cited are security. So again, there is, you know, if you think about it, there's an information security management process within ITIL, and so that's kind of an obvious one. And that process itself maybe doesn't go into all of the details that a CISO or a security group might need. And so, you know, there's concepts of sort of GRC and then remediation of incidents, et cetera. But those concepts work really well. Another area is PPM, so project and portfolio management. So we're seeing a lot of organizations that are saying, you know, a lot of our projects are, you know, driven by change, driven by sometimes problem, driven by, you know, requests that could fit very well in a portal, right? Add to a service catalog, make project requests of IT for them to help with various aspects of business automation. So PPM, you start thinking about how you manage demand in a more broad sense, not the demand in ITIL per se, but in a more broad sense for projects. That's another one. Again, HR, as I indicated, sort of onboarding, some of the HR pieces and parts. A lot of that could be either automated or integrated to an existing system. And then facilities, again, is another one that's interesting because you start thinking about facilities, and there's a few areas in there that make sense. So, for instance, making requests of facilities. Obviously, the whole notion of request management plays a role. But also, you start thinking about this CMDB concept and configuration items. So in facilities, a big deal is maintenance. And since you can have a building as a CI, you can have, if you're we have a school district actually that uses our facilities management, and they have refrigerators and stoves, and from their kitchens in their health services department, they have a nutrition area, and because there's maintenance, and so they schedule all their maintenance and automate all of that scheduling in there as well. So there's a lot of interesting areas that can be sort of expanded, and I think it's each organization sort of has to examine for themselves. But as Julie said, having solid, efficient processes in place, right? You have to sort of start there, and I'd say that's a challenge for a lot of organizations as well, because a lot of organizations are not nearly as mature as they potentially need to be in order to gain all of the benefits of expanding beyond IT with service management, doing further automating, adopting AI, et cetera. A lot of it hinges on, again, kind of having your existing sort of foundational set of processes and automation or tools in order before you can kind of move on. So with that,
hey, Matt, can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that what I'm not suggesting is that we fix things first and then, transform. But it needs to be included as part of that transformation that we are acknowledging, hey, the current processes are not where they need to be, or the way that we use the tool is not where we need it to be, but to not slow down the pace of change or to become less agile in order to fix a broken process first. But it can't be avoided, and I think that's what a lot of times we think we're going to automate, and then we didn't fix the fundamental things that were broken. But as part of transforming and really being able to move forward, we have to be looking at those things as we're going through digital transformation, not fixing it first and then transforming.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I think that, and I think, again, time is of essence, and I think that's something that can be considered as well in that transformation. So, all right, Chris, Chris or Julie, any other sort of comments before we go to Q&A?
Sure. So one final thing I would say about enterprise service management or expanding your services is it's really important to make sure that you have your own processes mature. And I think Julie had started touching on this a little bit, but if you don't have your own processes mature and you start trying to spread them out to other areas, you're going to find that you get to be in one of those, the barefoot shoemaker's children situation, because you're spending so much time working on everyone else's stuff that your own stuff never gets done. So it's really important to try and prioritize and schedule that when you are expanding outside to other areas, because there is a lot of value that you can add as an IT organization by doing service management beyond IT. But you also need to remember that if you're spending all of your time doing everyone else's work, you might forget about your own.
Yep. Excellent. Okay, so quick reminder, if you have a question, go ahead and type it into the Q&A area now. We do have a couple of questions in here. So let's talk. Chris, the first one's for you. How do you motivate your student staff as you make changes and modernize? And maybe that's a kind of a user experience question. I think it fits right within what you're, what some of your expertise is in.
So I just did a presentation at NERComp about this. However, motivating student staff is a very important aspect, especially even without considering the automation aspects or advancing and modernizing different processes. Student workers, especially for us in higher education, tend to have a lot of other things going on. We run into issues where a student worker might have a test and they just aren't really in it for that shift, or there's other things that could be coming up. So, I mean, we could talk for hours on this, but basically motivating student workers is about finding a way to make them want to work there. So providing a job that is enjoyable for them is a huge aspect of that. So having a tool that is easy to use and that makes their job easier to do is really helpful. We find that if we add too much overhead, then the students can kind of lose all motivation, or they just don't want to fill out form after form, field after field, select after select, when they could just be doing something simpler. The other thing is to remember that student workers want to see the value of what they're doing. So letting them know when there is good feedback from people who are working with them to help that out. We've done some other things in areas like gamification and incentive systems, but that's its own, different rabbit hole that we could go down there. But it's basically making sure that just like any employee, your student workers feel valued and appreciated for the work that they're doing, and that if they ever do get in a situation where maybe they're having a really bad day, that you provide escalation paths for them to get out of those.
Yeah. So would you say, by the way, that that's not just student workers, but let's just say younger staff that's being hired onto a help desk? These similar concepts would apply. It's not just students, but it seems like people are more and more distracted with devices, especially younger generations, with social media, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. So there's definitely something to be said there about generational differences, but I also find that we could also say that's to Tier 1 in general. So student workers is what it typically is in a university setting, but that Tier 1 position has a lot of those same problems, no matter what age group or generation they belong to there. Motivating your Tier 1 means that you're going to have a much stronger higher tiers, because if they're doing their job and they're doing it well, it's going to prevent a lot of that stuff from accidentally getting escalated.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'd like to make a quick comment here. I don't care what your age is or how long you've had technology. No one likes doing the same thing over and over again, 5 days a week, 50 weeks out of the year. Repetitiveness is where that boredom comes from. So, as we're seeking this digital transformation, one of the things that we need to make transparent to the people that are working for us to achieve that is that the repetitive nature of the work should improve. Instead of constantly facing password resets and, fulfilling the same requests and answering the same questions, we now have chat bots that take care of those questions on our website, and we have automated workflow that allows people to go up to that SelfService Portal and submit their requests. And so now, the things that they come to us for are stuff that wasn't easy to do, that is now automated through using tools or is an exception to one of those processes, and that makes their work more enjoyable than it does. I get it. I have 4 children that are of a younger generation that are easily distracted, but at the same time, like Chris said, we have to make their job worth doing, to be honest.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense as well. So, all right, moving on to another question. So I'll point this at you first, Julie, or direct this to you, which is if you were to choose just 2 or 3 ITSM processes to focus on and automate in order to best support today's tech-savvy customers, what would you recommend?
I'm going to kind of buck this one. I firmly believe that there is not enough of portfolio management going on in between the business and IT. So part of our challenge is that we don't have a tremendous amount of visibility into all change. And like Chris said before, the more formal, the more rigid, or not rigid, but the more established your change management processes, the more likely you are to minimize the impact. And I would say the same thing goes for strategic and tactical planning, not just operational stuff. We have to get better at, make it easy for people to submit, hey, we want to do this, we want to do that. Capture it in as easy as a way as possible and then manage that portfolio holistically so that we see all change from the business and IT holistically and make better choices on what we engage in and how we engage it and allocate our resources, because I haven't worked with any IT organization lately who hasn't been charged with doing more with less. And that means making smarter decisions about what we embrace from a change perspective. So portfolio to me is number one, and then obviously change management would follow after that, making sure that as an outcome from better portfolio management is getting a handle over managing that change, automating as much as we can, meaning change management has transactional work just like incident or problem. So the stuff that's known is repetitive. We know it. We should be able to document it, automate it as much as possible, allowing us to focus our resources on managing more of the strategic change. But I would say portfolio, change management, and project management are so three that are tied at the hips that I think we've been focused on incident and problem for a while. If you're still not having done that, then obviously there's some room for improvement there. But better alignment with the business to me is portfolio, change, and project.
Okay. And Chris, I don't know, do you want to add anything? Because I think you talked a little bit about change management, asset dependency, and then training and knowledge management earlier. But is there anything else you want to add to this?
So Julie really covered all the bases there. The really important part there is to make sure that you're picking things that add value and things that you have the capabilities to do. So we always say you can't automate what you haven't defined. So if you haven't figured out what it is you want to automate, you're never going to really be able to achieve how you're going to automate it. Automation really is helpful in places that you just have a lot of button pushers or a lot of things that you already know you have the answers to. So getting people to the right resources is going to be the quickest way to do that, or figuring out which repetitive tasks can be simplified. So that can be something like filling out a change request and figuring out which fields could we derive from other fields. Or if you're looking at an incident form and you have a bunch of different request forms, but you only have a generic one you're sending people, then you send them the follow-up, and you have that sort of workflow where you know you have these built-in human dependencies. Figuring out which areas you have as a mature process are going to be the best ones. So there might not be a one-size-fits-all answer. It's going to really depend on which processes your organization has as the most mature ones.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to throw in two more concepts of that into the mix. So one is, again, release and deployment, right? So, it's closely related to change, but it's not the same. And in today's agile development world with continuous integration and the way that software especially is being deployed, I think that's a critical area that organizations shouldn't ignore. You probably hopefully haven't ignored it. Maybe you've already transitioned to more of a modern DevOps mentality and style, but I think that's absolutely critical. And in fact, at recent, I think at Pink, right, one of the concepts that they were talking a lot about was integrated service management. So that concept makes a ton of sense as you think about how do you integrate within IT first and then beyond. So the other one, though, that I'll throw back to you, Chris, is this isn't exactly a process, but absolutely critical, right? And that is, as you think about a portal, right, or a service catalog, right, user experience is paramount, right? I don't think we talked about this, but look at statistics, and a lot of companies, as they look at where do they get requests coming from, whether that's change or incident or whatever requests. There's still a very high percentage are coming through channels like phone and email. They're not actually taking advantage of the portal, and a lot of times I feel like it's because the user interface is poorly designed, it's not omni-channel, et cetera. But can you talk a little bit about how the role of user experience in a portal plays a role as we transition to this digital sort of world?
So a self-service portal is becoming increasingly vital in that transition to digital. There's a concept that we use called shift left, and the basic concept behind that, without going too far into detail, is that you want to enable, prevention, self-service, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, in that order. it costs you far less money to prevent an issue or to have someone go through self-service than it does to have that escalated to Tier 3 or a vendor. So it's a simple concept like that, but the idea is by having a portal that is well-designed and usable, people will use it. So the main goal of having a good self-service portal is that people will either not need to submit those requests because they're doing their own self-service or they're finding the right knowledge articles, or the idea is that you are providing a filter or a funnel that gets people to the right place if they do need to submit a request. So by focusing on the user experience of a portal, you're making it so that people want to use it. If people understand how things work or how they relate to each other, they're going to be learning more about your organization just by navigating through your portal. It's also a place that you want people to keep going to and want to go to. You don't want to make it a barrier to them getting things done. And that can be one of the biggest problems, is if you make it very difficult for people to do those things, they're just not going to do it. They're going to pick up the phone, or they're going to email, or they're going to talk to their boss who's then going to email, and you're going to create lots of issues.
You know,
okay.
Chris, I call this the Google effect, in that, you know, we used to think that our end users didn't like to use self-service, and yet you look at how many people Google every single day. And the reason why they do is because it works. So, and there's a lot of criteria in that. Google made it very easy at the beginning. They didn't plaster a bunch of stuff all over the page. They simply put a box with a question mark, and you typed in anything that you were wanting to type in, and you hit return, and it brought up relevant results. So it was easy to use, it was fast, and it worked. And when I go look at customers' portals, right, they've developed these, and they've spent, you know, months in planning to launch a portal. I had one customer that they had so much pressure from the business to launch it, and I said, well, let me take a look at it. You know, let me see what's going on with it. And the first screen was, is this an incident or a request? Like, your customers know the difference, right? I had another customer recently where they had made great strides in their user portal, but the first page was a bunch of boxes that look a lot like the Microsoft Windows desktop kind of, you know, the swipeable things on a tablet. But each one of those, when you clicked on it, brought up a menu. So the design should have been above the fold, looks just like Google, right? A box with simply a question mark. And you're seeing a lot from a user interface perspective where we're standardizing on this now, that above the fold, what you see at eye level on the screen is just a box with a question mark. Then down below, instead of clicking to go into various parts of the site, you're giving information that's relevant to the customer. Here's the top 10 articles that are dynamically created based upon current usage of knowledge. Here's the top forms that we use in request fulfillment, dynamically created based upon the volume of calls, right? Then they can see their tickets that are open so that they can click right on them to get a status update or to submit a new one. So you're creating a user interface that's incredibly easy for your customers to understand and that works. You all too often they have an IT context where we're putting stuff up there that doesn't make any sense to the customer, that requires them to make decisions that they don't really need to make. They just want service. And I think as we integrate with business processes, that's going to become even more important, because it's not going to be just IT stuff that they're going to that portal for, but also business processes. So we have to rethink the way that we design the user interface. And as well, as you said, Chris, that shift left philosophy where we're bringing that knowledge closer and closer to the customer so that they can serve themselves. And I think the two go hand in hand.
Well said, well said. And a great cap to our webinar today. So thank you so much, Julie. Thank you, Chris, for your time and participation. So thank you, everybody who attended. We do have another upcoming webinar, 7 Deadly Sins of ITIL. We also have an ebook on the same title, and that you can check out at shareable.com. If you guys have any other feedback or want more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me personally, matt.clausen@sharewell.com, or of course through our website. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Have a great day.